Hello and welcome to the Unnamed Automotive Podcast. My name is Sammy Haj Assad, and with me, as always, is my good friend and fellow automotive journalist, Benjamin Hunting. Say hi to the people, Ben.
Greetings, human listeners.
Greetings to everyone, and thank you for listening to this week's episode, or thank you for trying something new if this is the first time you're listening to our episode. I will reiterate that Ben and I are a pair of automotive journalists, but more important than that, we're very good friends. Isn't that right, Ben?
That is accurate.
Not only is that accurate, but we have a podcast that we have agreed will not play music as some sort of introduction or branding exercise.
Yes, the messages we received after last week's podcast were overwhelmingly in the don't play music camp. So that's what we're going to go with.
So
I think it would be too much. I mean, if every episode...
we had the repetitive intro and then the music?
Yeah, the music combined with Sammy confronting me with the reality of our friendship every single time we record, I think would push the podcast over a ledge it's not designed to go over.
I mean, it's confronting you. How
else would you describe it? I'm forced to confirm or deny something that's very intimate immediately at the start of the podcast.
Yeah, I think it's fair.
I know for you, intimacy means something different.
This week, we have some cars to talk about, but before we get to it, I want Ben to tell you where you can find all of his latest work. Ben, can you do that for me?
Sure, you can find my work at Motor Trend, at Inside Hook, and at Capital One.
So not only do I confront you about our friendship, I confront you about, like, telling people what to do, or I confront you about things, like, doing things.
I think one is a confrontation, and the other is putting me on the spot.
Is an order. Oh, I'm putting you on the spot.
A little bit. Just a little bit.
And you can find my work, in case you were interested, at autotrader.ca, driving.ca, and Electric Autonomy Canada. What are we talking about this week, Ben? We've got some cars to talk. We've got a new EV to talk about this week. Isn't that right?
Yeah, it's one that I think we've all been waiting for, at least I have, for a long time. And the reason for that is because it was kind of a problem for the company that was building it and then not building it and then building it again, maybe, question mark, but not selling it. And then finally building it and selling it at the same time.
Such a bungled approach to delivering an electric vehicle can only be performed by, which automaker is it?
General Motors.
Yes, General Motors, who boast that they have one of the most advanced electric technologies and platforms and batteries, but has no idea how to get it into people's hands.
So General Motors has done a lot of really great things with EVs and hybrids and plug-ins, and it's also made a bunch of mistakes.
Yes. I mean, I guess you have to make mistakes to make good stuff, but
sure,
hopefully...
but sometimes they happen at the same time, and I think that with in recent history, we have the Chevrolet Bolt, which was a really good EV, still is, and how good was the Bolt? It was good enough to survive a recall tied to manufacturing defects that caused 16 fires because of its batteries. And that eventually led to a $150 million settlement with owners. And yet people kept buying it. People kept buying it all the time because it was good. And it was still good. The vehicle was good. It had a battery problem. People moved on. But GM didn't move on. They decided we're going to, well, I guess they did move on in the sense that they didn't move on from what the Bolt did to their reputation. They moved on from the technology. They're like, you know what? People still like the Bolt, but we like the idea of an entirely different electrification system. We're calling it Ultium, and all of our cars in the future are going to be built on this Ultium platform. So we're going to stop selling the Bolt, even though it's successful, and eventually bring it back, but not until Ultium is a real thing. And Ultium was supposed to be a real thing like 2 years ago.
And basically, it kind of was in a very niche way. I think the Hummer EV was the first Ultium-based vehicle.
Sure, but then it was supposed to be the Cadillac LYRIQ, which is the vehicle we're talking about today.
Okay.
And the LYRIQ initially, production started, I believe, in March of 2022 for the 2023 model year.
Usually in 2022?
Yes, usually how it works. Sammy, in the first calendar year, they built only like just over or just under, I can't get the exact number, I've seen conflicting figures, but in the neighborhood of 100 Cadillac LYRIQs.
100 LYRIQs, and does that make it seem like that makes it seem like they were hand-built at that point?
It's not because people didn't want them either. They had full order books. They were unable to build them to a level of quality with which they could deliver them to customers. And then When vehicles did get to customers, there were lots of problems. Most of those were software related, from what I understand. I think a lot of our listeners are probably familiar with the Blazer EV, which came out, I want to say, maybe a year after the LYRIQ. And when it was released, initially, it had a ton of software problems. I think they had to do a stop sale. It might even be longer than a year. Anyway, that was another similarly sized Ultium platform vehicle. So you kind of have to consider that like 2023 was a lost season for the LYRIQ. Like they built almost none of them.
Yeah.
Then in 2023 model year, in the calendar year 2023, so almost 12 months after it went on sale for the first time, they were able to ramp up production. But they continue to have problems, continue to have quality issues with the vehicle of varying degrees. I don't think it's as serious as it once was, but it's still something that crops up. And, you know, when you're a luxury car company like Cadillac, and this is your first mainstream electric vehicle, I mean, they had the Celestiq. I'm not sure if they've ever delivered a Celestiq or not, but it exists.
I don't think the Celestiq is finished yet, or is a production vehicle yet.
Okay. And then in the past, they had the plug-in, they had the ELR.
Plug-in version of the Volt, the two-door ELR,
which was really cool, but way too expensive. I think it was like $80,000 or something insane like that.
Not particularly interesting to drive either.
No, it was fine. I mean, it was Volt-like. It had a little less range because it was larger or heavier, I think, because of all the luxury gear. But this is a company that traditionally has not done electrification all that well. There was a hybrid version of the Escalade that was questionable and very expensive. I mean, it was fine, but it was not something that really moved the needle for the brand. So all this to say, the LYRIQ was important, Sammy.
Very important. I mean, it needed to come in and re-establish this General Motors sort of expertise in electrification. And then in addition to that, it needed to like wipe the taste of the ELR from people's mouths as well. Not that that was a bad taste, but I think it just wasn't interesting or impressive enough.
I don't think anyone even knew it existed. I don't
know
how many.
That's also important.
And the other thing that's important about the LYRIQ is it's not like other car companies have been treading water during this time, right? Like
yes.
Tesla has the Model Y, which is, you know, similarly priced, even if it's not a real luxury vehicle, quote unquote. There's the Genesis electrified GV70. Which is a vehicle that Genesis didn't even wait to design their own platform. They were like, okay, we have this gas-powered car that we can convert, and they've done a very credible job with that, even if the range isn't quite there. And then there's the BMW iX. Yeah. So those, I think, in my mind, are the top three competitors, sort of, for the LYRIQ. Can you think of anything else that Cadillac's up against?
I mean, in addition to the like maybe a BMW, you said BMW iX. I thought the iX is large and kind of expensive. I'm not sure I can completely visualize the size of the LYRIQ because every time I see it in photo,
it's not tiny.
It doesn't seem that big. So I want to hear from you how you describe that size and functionality.
I would say like large midsize.
Interesting.
Yeah, I mean it's not a 3-row, and I don't think you could make a 3-row out of it. But it's not small. It's not a small vehicle. I guess you could say EQE maybe from Mercedes, but I want to say that EQE is much more expensive.
Okay.
I'm thinking. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I would think a comparable. Because what's interesting about the LYRIQ is if you look at pricing, it's actually fairly affordable for a luxury car. It starts under $60,000.
Yeah, that's what I mean. I think that's a very interesting approach for a luxury vehicle because there's some mainstream offerings that are around the $60,000 mark, right?
For sure. And if you want to, the most expensive version of the LYRIQ is about $77,000, and that model, is it really that expensive? $77,000? I think so.
It also sounds relatively approachable by luxury car standards.
You can add a few more options that'll probably push it close to 80.
Okay,
but in any case, it is affordable in a way that Mercedes and Audis that are electrified tend not to be. I think the iX is also more expensive, kind of pushing it out of the conversation. But I think what brings it back into the cross shopping is how nicely appointed the Cadillac is inside.
Okay.
That's something to maybe talk about a little later. Now,
where are we right now in that conversation?
We're still trying to figure out if it's 2024 and Cadillac has had, I guess, 2 years to figure things out with the Lyriq, you would think that this model is problem free, right?
Yes, but until you just said that, I haven't had to think about it.
Dun dun dun. I wish I could tell you it was. There's a lot to like about this vehicle. I think that if it wasn't under the Ultium shadow, I would feel better about recommending it to people. Mm-hmm. But I had some experiences with it that made me question whether Cadillac has completely figured out its quality problems. And there's also a couple of things that irritated me about the vehicle that from a design perspective. But where do you want to start?
Let's start with your irritations first and foremost.
Okay, well, they're small.
Okay.
There's two primary irritations. The first is this is one of many Cadillacs that has a large... This isn't really related to the EV part, so I kind of feel silly talking about this, but it has that large curved screen on the dashboard.
Okay.
And it's a cool looking screen, but Cadillac is determined to use like every single inch of screen space, right? And the problem with that, and one of the reasons I think why you have a separate gauge cluster from a separate infotainment system in modern vehicles is because the steering wheel blocks your line of sight. It's always going to block part of the screen. And in the Cadillac's case, it blocks a section of the screen that essentially makes it useless. Like when I'm driving, there's a section of screen that's like maybe 3 inches wide by 4 inches, 5 inches tall that I can't see or use in any way. So it might as well not be there is kind of what I'm saying. So when you have functionality that's there, whether it's infotainment functionality or whether it's like a tracker for mileage or whatever, it's useless. I would like them to rethink. I'm not a very tall person. I'm probably average height. So how I'm sitting in the vehicle, I think, is probably similar to how other people will have the steering wheel adjusted. And it just seems like they kind of whiffed on the UI there. The other more egregious problem is I was trying to figure out how to change the bolster on the seats because the lumbar support was like really inflated and it was bugging me. So on the door, it has the traditional like a pictogram where you can move a control that looks like your seat and tilt it and lift it and all that stuff. I eventually found where the lumbar was. There's like a dial in front of this. It's a round dial. When you touch the dial, you get one of those screens on the infotainment.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, which is, first of all, strike one.
Yeah.
I shouldn't have to look at a screen when I'm adjusting a seat. That's something my body knows is happening. But the other problem is, depending on how you're touching the knob, it cycles back and forth between the massage feature and the lumbar feature. And you can't easily control it. And I never in a full week figured out how to do it properly. So I was constantly trying to adjust lumbar, but turning on the massage, and it was awful. It's a real pet peeve of mine. Just make 2 controls. Like, it's a Cadillac. I'm paying a lot of money. You can put an extra button in there.
Absolutely. I think interface design, we're still like struggling in that. But to me, it's one of the most frustrating things when you get into a car and the seat controls don't make sense because it's among the first interaction you have with the vehicle, just getting set up in it. And then when they are not functioning the way you need them to function, or you need to look somewhere else, suddenly your like flow is disrupted. And then you've got to relearn you're in this whole process of like, oh, I guess this is a completely different car than I'm used to. And then you're less confident, I think, in the car altogether.
And the other thing that sucks is, you say we're still figuring out UI, but I think the reason we're still quote unquote figuring it out is because designers feel the need to constantly change things all the time.
Yeah.
It's not like we've been reaching for a solution over decades and we haven't quite got there yet. It's that we've had many good solutions that have been abandoned and replaced by something else at the whim of designers.
Yeah, absolutely. That's so, I don't know, like it seems so arbitrary and like obscure. And those big screens, we've talked about big screens in the past and what's the deal with having to accommodate massive screens in a car. Cadillac has had pretty good implementations of the big screen. I think maybe better than like, let's say Mercedes Hyperscreen. Would you say the same?
Oh, for sure. Like, again, this is a complaint. It's not a deal breaker.
Yeah.
I had to pick something about the interior that I didn't like because the rest of the interior looks really nice. They used great materials. It doesn't feel sterile like some of the minimalist EVs have over the last few years.
Yeah.
There's some real real organic stuff inside this vehicle that you want to touch, that looks nice, that makes you feel like you're sitting inside something special. And it wasn't just me who felt that way. There were a lot of my passengers commented on it as well. It's a very well conceived cockpit. It's a very well conceived cabin overall.
Very cool. Okay. I'm actually now starting to look at more photos of this cabin. And yeah, it looks fairly attractive. A little, I would call it a little uptight.
What does uptight mean?
Like, it looks like kind of like conservative. It's not really pushing the envelope in a lot of ways.
What is a non-conservative interior to you? Like, does it need to be turquoise? Like,
something, kind
like
of
a tropical bird,
off the wall, or. But I am noticing like there's a lot of touch buttons on the steering wheel. The steering wheel actually looks really busy to me.
Yes, but I can't single out Cadillac for that.
Okay, fine.
That's everything these days.
And we've talked about this in the Escalade, but they have that gauge pod to the left of the steering wheel.
I like that one. That one I can see.
That one works really nicely.
It does work, and it's otherwise wasted space. You know, like it's not behind anything, so you have a direct line of sight. But we were talking, remember, about the Elantra? Was it the Elantra or the Sonata? I think it was the Sonata.
The Sonata.
And how the Sonata has that weird little square of fabric that's there.
The pin cushion.
Yeah, and that's why it's there, because otherwise it would be a gap. I guess their screen was only so large, and they didn't want to over-center it. So that's, and Cadillac's like, well, we can make this big, large panel, but we don't want to have a dead space, so we're going to put a usable screen there. And I'm into that.
Okay. So the cabin is where you're finding some pretty positive things to say about it.
It's the most compelling part of the vehicle design-wise.
Okay.
I think the exterior looks fine. I'm not going to belabor it. I think it looks okay. I had positive comments about it. In profile, it looks a little generic, but front and rear, it's very Cadillac, and I think they did a good job there.
Okay. The space in it, you said it's pretty spacious.
Yeah, it's fine.
Like that rear seat, does it feel like a long wheelbase kind of car? Like it's got lots of legroom? No.
It has a normal amount of legroom.
That's meaning so little these days. Sorry, man.
I picked up a piece of art at an estate sale in the LYRIQ, and I needed a safe place to put it. And the seats are white. There was white leather, and the piece of art was dirty. And get your mind out of the gutter. Not dirty like that. Dirty like in another way.
Well, thank you for clearing that up.
And I had to put it on the floor, and I was able to put it on the floor behind my seat and in front of the bench in the back. And I didn't have to adjust my seat at all. And the art was probably like, I don't know, 2.5, 3 feet in terms of width. So that's pretty decent, I think.
Okay, perfect.
For then, just to give you an idea of the size.
What about the cargo space?
I did not
use... This looks like a huge car.
I did not use the cargo space all that much.
It doesn't look like a huge car, but it looks like it would have a very big trunk.
I did not use the cargo space all that much. I did have a large cooler in it, a very large cooler that fit with no problems and left a lot of room for other things that I picked up on that same trip. And it's sad because there's an ice cream factory near where my parents live, and it's pretty famous. The brand is pretty famous in Quebec, and they have a factory seconds fridge inside the factory where you can go in and get ice cream that didn't meet their standards. Like if it's like it's, you know how like when you buy slightly irregular clothing.
Yeah.
It's like that, but it's ice cream, and it comes in it's like a generic container, and they'll handwrite what the flavor is in marker on the container, and then there'll be a huge sticker that says hors norme, which means outside the norms.
Okay, yeah.
So I like it because sometimes you get experimental flavors that didn't just work. That just didn't work. Or it's always very cheap, like extremely cheap, like $2 for like a gallon kind of deal.
Okay.
And it's still high quality ice cream. I don't know. I mean, I'm not sending it to a lab to get tested for what might be inside of it.
And thank goodness you're not.
So we went to the ice cream factory with the LYRIQ. I know I sound like I'm writing a story for Better Homes and Gardens right now.
Yeah.
We went to the ice cream factory in the LYRIQ with our cooler, and we get there, and there's always a big line. It's a Saturday and it's a holiday weekend. And I went right to the freezer, and they only had 2 gallons, and they were both like double strawberry, and I'm like, no way, I'm not interested. And it was super disappointing, and the line to wait for ice cream was so long, we actually went to a rival ice cream place and just ate there instead. So I got to see my family. That was nice, but the ice cream part was disappointing.
Okay. Now then, now that we've got that out of the way,
Yes.
talk to me about this drive experience. Is Ultium in a more, like I said, Ultium came to us first with like these really big, really big vehicles with tons of power.
Well, this is a very heavy vehicle that has tons of power. It weighs about 6,000 pounds, like just under 6,000 pounds.
Okay. That's pretty heavy, yes.
There are two versions. There's a rear-wheel drive that has 340 horsepower, and then there's a dual motor that has 500 horsepower and 450 pound-feet of torque. That's the one I had. I think it does 60 in under 5 seconds, which is like a second faster than the base model. That's fast enough. What this vehicle is, it's not sporty at all. Like the handling, you feel all the 6,000 pounds. It's more of a cruiser, more of a yacht-like experience out on the road. A traditional luxury car, I guess you could say. And that's fine. Even when I put it in sport mode, it didn't feel fun to drive. Like it's good to drive and it's fast when it needs to be. But what's more impressive, Sammy, it has a 102 kilowatt hour battery pack. And
that's huge. Wow.
Yeah, I think that's the size.
We don't get very many that are over the 100 mark, right?
I couldn't tell you.
I don't think so.
The reason I'm bringing it up is because normally when you have a dual motor and a single motor vehicle, there's a lot of difference in terms of range, right, between those two models. For the Cadillac, the difference is 7 miles. And I think
that's very interesting. Why is that?
I couldn't tell you. I'm assuming they're just better at managing the electrical system. But the all-wheel drive version that I had a 307-mile range. It's about 500 kilometers. And the rear-wheel drive version is only 314.
Okay.
So that's 70 miles better than a Genesis electrified GV70. So, I mean, that's impressive.
That is very nice.
And it's right. The iX that I mentioned before, it's right up there. They're very similar, almost identical. I think there's one version of the iX that does like 7 or 10 or 7, something like that, extra miles. Obviously, the Tesla gives you more mileage than that. But the Tesla is a penalty box when it comes to the interior.
Yeah.
So that makes it hard to compare in that sense.
Okay, then. So the range is pretty nice.
It's good, and it held up in the real world. It was very. I did a lot of driving, and I never got behind myself. I never found myself thinking like, "Wow, that's using more than I would have predicted," or I didn't get into a situation where I had less battery than was projected by the vehicle.
And then talk to me about the performance aspect. Then I like that. First of all, I really appreciate hearing that the range was really consistent. Talk to me about this performance. You mentioned the power of these. You had the dual motor model.
Yeah.
And you said it's not sporty, but it's quick, right? Like it's quick. Like we mentioned this actually. We talked about this off pod. But tell me, it's quick, right?
It's quick enough.
Is there any defining characteristics of that powertrain?
Not really.
No. Now I need to talk to you about this because I feel like this is an important transition that we're going through in the industry is that there's all these EVs that come in different configurations and kind of like different categories. There's single motor EVs, there's dual motor EVs, there's luxury EVs, there's like compact and subcompact, and then like full size EVs. But I feel like a lot of them feel very similar, and it might be because they're using the same, very similar electric motors. But it is so difficult to differentiate the driving experience through so many of these electric vehicles. And there's only a couple that have really stood out. I'm going to say straight up, I think the Porsche Taycan, and I'm going to assume that the e-tron GT-RS is up there with the Taycan in terms of delivering a very exciting and noticeably different driving experience. And then I think the BMW i vehicles with an M variant have also been pretty exciting and interesting to drive in a way that so many other EVs haven't been. And I'm saying all this because when you're buying a luxury vehicle, there are certain things that you want to stand out. And I truly believe that drive experience is among them. And in the past, when it comes to gas-powered vehicles, the smoothness of the engine, or maybe the soundtrack of the engine, or the smoothness of the transmission, or how many gears, or how efficient it was, were all among those purchasing reasons, I think, or the connection that a driver would have with one of these vehicles, and one of the reasons they would spend extra money over a mainstream product. But I'm feeling so many of these electric vehicles feel the same in terms of their powertrain, that differentiation among luxury and even mainstream or luxury and other luxury vehicles is really becoming thin.
Yeah, I think it's gone. I think that era is behind us. I think there was a time when drivetrain tuning was, as you pointed out, a major differentiator for these luxury companies that had invested billions and billions of dollars in their internal combustion platforms. I think that electric motors are the great leveler. And that's why we've talked about in the past in the podcast, so many vehicles are just filled with distracting gadgets now because car companies are working as hard as they possibly can to conceal the fact that the experience behind the wheel is very, very similar compared to much less expensive vehicles. And I think that the massive weights of these vehicles also informs that. You have very little opportunity to reduce weight when you're talking about battery packs whose chemistry makes a very specific demand and does not allow you to innovate in a way that meaningfully cuts pounds.
So then, like, this is frustrating. This is really frustrating to me. Now, at least the LYRIQ, its starting price is actually fairly approachable in a way that, you know, some person who might be buying a fully loaded Ioniq might be willing to make the jump to an entry-level LYRIQ or something like that. Could happen, I think. Or maybe the Mach-E, like those Mach-E GTs,
yeah, those
can get kind
really
of pricey.
Expensive.
So I can feel like there's some, you know, you can look at the interior and the styling and the technology of this Cadillac and say that's enough for me to want to jump into a luxury car and feel comfortable spending that price difference.
Sure.
What else is there to tell me, to inform me about the LYRIQ and what makes it a more interesting drive? Or
I don't think it has a more interesting drive.
That's it.
And I think that's fine. I'm on the opposite side of the spectrum to you. I don't look for the same things in an EV that I do in an ICE vehicle.
Okay.
So, for example, it's interesting that you brought this up because I know that there is an Ioniq 5N in the fleet here in Montreal. And I don't know if I'm going to book it.
Why not?
Because I'm not sure if it's something that I'm interested in sampling. On a racetrack, maybe. But as a daily driver, I don't see how I would take advantage of what it has to offer.
Yeah.
And it doesn't super appeal to me because as a driver, that's not what I'm looking for personally. And I'm not sure how much better, quote unquote, it would be than a regular Ioniq 5, given what it is. I know that's maybe an obtuse statement to make. It's like when I had that F-150...
It's a bit personal, of course.
When I had that F-150 Lightning, it's very fast, but I don't want it to be very fast. I have no plans. Like, I spent a lot of time with that vehicle, and I never really took advantage of the speed because what am I going to hurdle this 7,000-pound vehicle down the highway at an insane pace? No, I'm not going to do that. That's not what it's for. You know what I mean? So
okay.
I just don't know if these capabilities that were being presented. I mean, it goes back to the idea of why do we suddenly have this huge range of 500, 600, 700 horsepower EVs out there?
Yeah, that all do 0 to 60 in like 3 or 4 seconds.
It's completely unnecessary.
And then feel the same on the road to one another because they've got no transmission. So they all weigh roughly. I mean, maybe not roughly. Within 1,000 pounds of each other. It's a bigger range than I think is reasonable. But they all feel somewhat similar. They just like take off from a stoplight. They get you to highway speeds and beyond in a couple of seconds, and they do it without you kind of noticing at times. Like it feels like a luxury car, like it's a really well geared luxury car.
If you want to think about what the LYRIQ is replacing in the Cadillac lineup, in a sense, it's replacing the XT5, right?
Which was not a very super competitive product. I think.
Yeah, it was not. One thing it wasn't was it was not a performance vehicle.
Okay,
there was no expectation when you got behind the wheel of let's not even talk about the XT5 because it wasn't super competitive, like as you pointed out. But let's just say,
sorry.
Okay, Lexus RX. When you get into that vehicle, you do not expect it to do 0 to 60 in 4 seconds, and it doesn't matter. People still buy it because it's totally cool. Now
it had such a smooth powertrain, and it was also offered in that hybrid setup, which was actually like novel for its class for a really long time.
Sure, but that's beside the point that I'm making. The point that I'm making is with EVs, the shift is now the attention has shifted to, if you make an EV, it had better be also really quick in addition to everything else. Instead of saying, oh, why don't we program these drivetrains so that they're less powerful, but you get more range or more efficiency? Let's not even talk about range. Let's just talk about efficiency. So you could, in theory, put in a smaller battery, get the same range out of it, but you're sacrificing some performance. That does not even seem to enter into the equation anymore for a luxury SUV. It has to be some kind of crazy performer.
Yeah, like, I don't get it. I don't
need a 500 horsepower LYRIQ. I absolutely don't. Nobody does. I stand by that. I can't think of a situation where a commuter needs a 500 horsepower luxury SUV just to go to work and back. Because that's what these vehicles are going to do. So
I don't know. And especially, like, it seems so, I don't want to say irresponsible, but it's close. Like, to sell a 7,000-pound rocket ship, that could get me in a lot of trouble with the law for going above the speed limit so quickly and easily. And then, if something happens while I'm driving and I get into, like, that's a lot of velocity and a lot of weight too, right?
It's a multifaceted conversation for sure.
I don't know. Okay, so then the drivetrain, the driving experience of this vehicle is fairly anonymous, is what you're saying.
I'm not saying it's anonymous. I'm just saying
every other EV.
I'm not necessarily saying that. I'm just saying it's not a standout. There's nothing about it that makes me want to call it out. But I would like to skip ahead and talk about the problems that I have with the vehicle that I think are legitimate concerns that would make me cautious about recommending it. The first one is I had a rattle in this vehicle inside the cabin in the back the entire time I was driving it. And this is a vehicle that had like 1,200 kilometers on the odometer. I want to say also pricing in Canada, which we did not talk about. It starts at 69,000 and goes up to 84. So again, it's very competitive with all the vehicles we were mentioning.
Okay.
But circling back to the pricing, if you're buying an $84,000 vehicle, which mine was on the order sheet, it should not have a rattle inside of it. No luxury vehicle should be constantly rattling. That is a problem that Cadillac needs to deal with. Another problem that I had was a crazy whining noise. It would come and go. At first I thought it was tire noise. Like sometimes these vehicles are on low rolling resistance tires, or this is 22-inch rims, right? They're very large. You get on certain stretches of concrete and you get a high pitch.
22?
22s, yeah. And you get like a high pitched noise that can come from the rubber. But this would come and go seemingly unrelated to where I was driving. It was loud enough for my passengers to notice. It sounded almost like a high-pitched electrical whining sound. Maybe it was the motors. At one point, I was driving it for a 90-second period where, and this is all at highway speeds, I would say above 50 miles an hour. At one point, it was so loud, it was like a rotating metal blade. It sounded like some piece of machinery from the front of the vehicle, front left of the vehicle specifically, and I thought something was wrong with the automobile. I did some research online. Motor Trend had a problem where this is something I didn't mention. The charge port, this is one of my other complaints. The charge port for the vehicle is very large. It cuts out of the fender just in front of the door on the driver's side. Yeah. And you push a button or you push the panel and it opens up in a mechanized way. And it's really shaky when it does that.
It's powered?
It's powered.
Yeah.
And then it's powered to close.
Yep.
My first problem with it is in the winter with ice and snow, that's going to be an issue. Mm-hmm. You're likely going to have snow jammed inside of it and iced over top of it.
We haven't heard this yet because it's not the only one that's had a powered charge port door. I think the Taycan and the Audi, the Porsche and the Audis have a powered door, and we haven't quite heard them. Apparently, they do something like vibrate to get ice off of them or something like that. I don't know.
Idea. In any case, It's not great. It's too big. It doesn't look good. It's ungainly and it moves in a non-graceful way. But apparently Motor Trend had an issue where the panel would get loose while they were driving and it would cause crazy wind noise. And it's roughly in the same area where I was hearing what I was hearing. So it's very possible that that's what was generating the sound. I can't verify that because I can't look at the panel and see if it's moved or displaced itself while I'm behind the wheel. But regardless of where that sound's coming from, that's alarming.
Yeah.
And it's something that should not be on a luxury vehicle. So it all points to Ultium still not being ready for prime time. I will point out that if that was a motor that was an issue, I had no performance issues, I had no range issues, no battery problems. But it's alarming, as I mentioned. So if you can get a good deal on a LYRIQ, and I think you might be able to, it qualifies for the federal tax credit, $7,500 in the States. You can get like a huge amount off in Canada and Quebec. I think it's like $12,000 or $15,000 off. And you can get a deal because dealers want to move these because they've, been sitting on inventory for an indefinite amount of time. Then go for it if you're comfortable assuming the risk of a brand new platform like this. Otherwise, I think you should wait.
Now, the other thing to mention is that in spite of all the Ultium issues that have been going on with the Blazer, and I'm guessing with this LYRIQ, from what I understand, a lot of them were software oriented and have been sorted out in a relatively quick
a lot of the ones that were affecting customer vehicles were software oriented, but that's not the vibe I got from the production problems they had.
Interesting. Okay. Then I was going to say like those software issues seem to be getting fixed at a pretty quick pace. It seems like Ultium is not just like it's not just they're continuing, like this is the priority for the automaker. And I thought that was just marketing speak whenever they unleashed some new technical information about whatever they're working on next. But it actually seems like it's not only a production priority, but also like an experience priority, a learning thing, a constant development for vehicles that are already out. And that's cool. I think that's important.
But I mean, also think about.
But I guess we should have had a working car from the get-go.
Yeah, and think about the fact that the problems with the LYRIQ pushed production for a lot of other Ultium cars into the future. Like we still don't have Silverado EVs in great numbers, right?
Yeah.
And part of that is because of all the issues they've had with Ultium production.
Okay. Yeah, fair. And I mean, I think in the long run, we're all hoping that everything, we're not all, I don't know about everybody, but I think the goal is for everything to be ironed out completely by the time the really mass market Chevy Equinox, which is also Ultium and is expected to be in the $30,000 range.
I think that this should have been ironed out before they launched. I don't think that the goal is to have it done by a certain car. I think that they failed if that's the goal.
Yeah.
I think you need to launch with cars that work. And this is the third or the fourth Ultium vehicle at this point. So
okay.
Yeah, I'm not as.
But
not
each
as
one is getting
there.
a little bit more mass market. Like is getting a little bit more broader appeal. The Hummer EVs, like how many are they selling in comparison to the LYRIQs?
Sure,
right?
but I mean, how many of the Cadillacs did they sell in the first year? 100. I mean, that's not acceptable.
Yeah.
You can't. That's not a business case. Anyway, I would like to move on from this topic.
Okay, sure.
I feel like we've talked it to death.
I want to continue the conversation about EVs, but in a different at a different automaker and a whole different perspective. Because last week we talked about one automaker who went bankrupt despite having a ton of money, which was Fisker. Fisker had we calculated about $4 billion to spend on producing and selling EVs, and they sold how many?
5,000.
5,000 or something. And then they went bankrupt. So now we've got this week another $5 billion for an electric automaker, this time from Volkswagen to Rivian. And this is an interesting investment for sure, isn't it, Ben?
I mean, it's interesting in the sense that Volkswagen had already invested in an electric SUV company called Scout that was trying to revive the Scout name from the, way back in the 70s when they had the, International Harvester was building these off-roaders. And so contrasting that investment with this brand new investment in Rivian, a company that makes essentially the same product, but for the luxury set, it's like, what are they doing? Are they funding two horses in the same race, or have they taken one of those horses out behind the barn and shot it in the electric head?
It seems so. Again, this is a question I asked last week. How are people just getting all this money? On the other hand, I would like to believe that Rivian has sold more than 5,000 cars. I'm not totally sure yet. I've seen a bunch of them, and I've heard very, very promising things about them, which is a complete contrast to what I heard about the Fiskers. And they seem to have a future product lineup that has really caught people off guard. Has really turned their head around, right?
So Rivian does not break out its sales into individual vehicles. They make three vehicles: the pickup, the SUV, and delivery vans for Amazon.
Right.
So last year they sold 19,000.
Okay.
410. This year they've sold 2,399. I don't know when that was last updated.
What the? Okay.
I think maybe that only goes to March.
Okay. That still doesn't sound like that actually doesn't sound like growth at all.
Well, I mean, I don't know what they're prioritizing. Okay. Anyway.
Is this a good thing or a bad thing we're witnessing?
I mean, it's Volkswagen's blood money for Dieselgate.
Yeah.
And for not having invested in their own EV platforms, really, or for being weird about their EV platforms. And we talked about
being weird about their
the
EV
ID7
platform.
and the ID Buzz not coming here. You know, it's just, I don't know what Volkswagen's doing with electric cars. I'm not sure they know what they're doing with electric cars outside of their home market. So why not throw a whole bunch of money at Rivian, which has a product that exists? It's a pretty good product. Clearly, billions of dollars would help them expand their manufacturing. And
seems to appeal to Americans too, right?
And Volkswagen says that Scout is still a going concern and their plans there haven't changed, but they haven't talked about what those plans are. So
they don't know what they're doing there. Yeah, okay.
And from that, there's one more piece of news that we wanted to talk about, and it also involves electrification, but it's probably going to make people angry. The new M5 has been driven.
Oh, yes.
And as planned, it is a plug-in hybrid. But I think what most people didn't expect was the kind of performance penalty that going to an electrified drivetrain was going to exact on the M5. The car is just over 1,000 pounds heavier than the last generation M5, and it is 900 pounds of that is specifically because of the hybrid system.
Yeah.
And according to Sammy has some numbers from friend of the show,
Thomas Hundle.
Yes, and he says it's actually like 0.1 seconds slower in a straight line. So they added power, they added a battery, and it's not faster. So I don't understand why they did it. And it's significantly penalized when it comes to, I would assume, handling, or at least how it feels out on the road, because it weighs half a ton more.
This thing is super expensive. Like, it is over 1,000 pounds heavier than the old one. And that's a really difficult to digest figure, right? Like, how do you call that a generational improvement when the performance the output has gone up, the weight has gone up so much so that the
output is just leveled out.
Yeah.
And they talked to the head of BMW M, and he said all sorts of the right things, like, we're able to put the weight as ballast in the floor because it's the battery and you get the lower center of gravity. But if the weight's not there at all, that's better, period. Like it's crazy. And without the hybrid technology, the M5 would be a 4,500 pound vehicle, which is too heavy again, but it's an executive sedan and we could cut it some slack, and it's certainly no heavier than other executive sedans in the past. This is a trend now in Germany. We have the new C63 from AMG that is super heavy because they went to I believe it's a 4-cylinder, a turbocharged 4-cylinder with a plug-in hybrid design of its own. And I don't get what's powering these decisions. It's almost as though product planners think that their performance division is exclusively about bench racing and exclusively about people comparing numbers to each other and not actually driving the cars. That's kind of how it feels. Maybe
it is. I mean, maybe that is exactly what gets the job done, right?
I feel like that's a dead end path. I feel like, does anyone really, once the Hellcat happened, did anyone really care about big horsepower past that? Like, once that barrier was broken and there was an affordable 700 horsepower car, I kind of feel like the next 800 horsepower car didn't, when the Mustang came out with more power, I don't think anyone really was on board with, oh wow, this is such a great technological advancement, Mm-hmm. I don't see the appeal of all this power. Again, I don't live somewhere with unrestricted highways.
Yeah.
But if the performance is the same as your gas model and you're getting like 43 miles of electric range, according to the M-Boss, it's 200 more horsepower than they could have got without the hybrid system. And they say that's a convincing number for their buyers. I don't know, man. I'm sure you could find 200 horsepower some other way.
This is brutal. Like, I don't know. I don't like this approach. I don't like this mindset of, bench, like you said, bench racing vehicles.
Hopefully they make an M5 CS that strips out the hybrid system.
Of course they're going to make an M5 competition, but I don't know.
No, not a competition, a CS. Like the lightweight or CSL, whatever they have to call it.
I
No
guess
battery.
so. I don't know. Can they do that?
Or
I
a
don't know.
smaller battery. Or
I don't like any of this. I don't know how they can justify that. I don't know, like, although I'm not going to be the one to say like the M people should be, hanging their heads in shame. It is just insane to me that the car has become worse in one of the key metrics that defined it.
Yeah.
Which was that 0 to 60.
And probably worse in other key metrics that they're just not telling us about, like handling.
Everyone is saying it handles great. I mean, they always say
mean,
that.
though? I mean,
I don't know.
Mechanical grip has become a substitute for handling, I think.
Okay.
In a lot of ways. I want a car that I enjoy driving, not a car that's like a vacuum that sticks to the road and doesn't have any characteristics past that. You know what I mean?
Okay.
Like, I don't need a tire that's half the width of the vehicle to give me. Anyway, I know I'm getting ridiculous here, but that's kind of how I feel. And
all
Sammy,
right.
if other people have plans to get ridiculous and they want to share what those ridiculous plans are with us, how can they get in touch with us?
The easiest way to do that is to head on over to our website, unnamedautomotivepodcast.com. There's a contact form there. You fill that out, and it lands in our inbox. You can continue telling us that you don't like music in podcasts, and we will continue to not put any music in our podcast. Or you can tell us what you think about heavy BMW EVs or General Motors' approach to electrification. I mean, that's what we really talked about today, and whether or not they're taking the right approach or they should be following another automaker's lead in what they think about that, right? Additionally, you can reach out to us on social media. You can find Ben on Instagram. He's at Hunting Benjamin. And you can find myself on the social media site formerly known as Twitter. I'm at Sammy_ha, like you're laughing. Or you can email us the old-fashioned way. It's Benjamin at benjaminhunting.com.
Sammy, what are you going to be talking about next week?
I don't know yet, Ben. I mean, I've been actually, I'm planning to go on a month-long trip and have been just clearing out my backlog. So, I mean, we'll continue to monitor the news and talk about some features that I've been working on, but we'll play it by ear. What about you? What do you got?
I would like to keep it a surprise, but I also want to talk about some experiences I had with my Jeep project, my Jeep Grand Wagoneer, because I've been doing some work on that after it's been sidelined by window issues for the past month or so. So I'm going to bring that up on the next week's podcast.
Very, very cool. I've been following this off the pod, and
I force you to follow it by sending you videos.
The listeners are going to love these updates.
All right. Thank you for listening, everybody.
See ya.